Hello from wherever you are. Thank you for joining us in our second series of conversation, and happy Youth Day. Today we are talking about youth and capacity building, and we appreciate you being with us to talk about this topic. So SAYDS, these conversations have been organized by SAYDS, which stands for Systems Acumen for Youth-Led Development Solutions. SAYDS is a nonprofit that is committed to tackling youth marginalization, exclusion, and disengagement in social initiatives. SAYDS has also created a program that equips youth with the knowledge and skills that they need to effectively tackle complex social problems. For the past 2 years, we have worked with 9 youth groups, looking and tackling at different complex social problems. And throughout this time, one of our mission has been to learn from what we have been doing. And indeed, we have learned about what it takes to equip youth with skills effectively, and what it takes for youth to learn those skills effectively, and most importantly, what they need to learn in order to engage in political issues. So also during those 2 past years, there has been a learning mission on our part where we've been committed to accumulating as much knowledge as we could on how youth can play a significant role in social change in the 21st century using complexity and a systems thinking perspective, with the hopes that in those 2 years, we can be able to create a platform where we try to accomplish 3 goals. Number 1, we share what we have learned and are learning. And number 2, we engage with others, both individuals and organizations globally that are working with youth, and mostly learn from them, especially those that have been doing this for a really long time. For instance, today we have Youth Congress, which has done this for a long time, and we are hoping to learn from them. And the other goal is to inspire others to think about the importance of using our complexity thinking perspective and systems thinking to tackle complex social problems in the 21st century. This series of conversations is the platform that we seek to use to accomplish these goals. To start this series, we've been doing these first 2 series looking at these youth issues, and we'd like you to join us today and the panel that we have today in addressing 4 questions that you can help us to think through. First, how can we prepare youth effectively to make it possible for them to tackle current and future complex challenges? What mechanisms, processes, platforms can be used to facilitate youth involvement and inclusion in governance and lasting social change? And what approaches can be used to teach youth how to facilitate social change at different levels of society? And what are some obstacles and constraints that youth face in becoming involved, especially in the context of complex social problems? So we here in the panel, we will not have answers to all these questions, but we are just hoping that we can be able to inspire you to think about what youth capacity building for tackling complex social problems should entail. We also want you to hope that it will provide you with some new ideas on how to build your own individual capacities as youth, or design appropriate capacity building programs that make it possible for youth to push for the appropriate policies for complex problems, and also to inspire you to learn about complexity and systems thinking, what that means, and how it can be used for capacity building. Now, let me introduce our panel, our very qualified panel in this regard that will be with us today. We have with us Catherine Muya, who I will refer to as Kate, who is a Tech Policy Fellow at the Lawyers Hub, which is a Pan-African community of lawyers working to employ technology to ease access to justice for tech startups, improve digital skills for lawyers, and offer policy alternatives within the tech policy arena to African governments. She's also a human rights advocate, passionate about citizenship and inclusion. Kate, I'll just let you say hi so people can know who it is, but of course your name is there too. So we also have Rapael Obonyo with us, who is a policy specialist and youth advocate. He's also a convener of Youth Congress, which is an organization that deals with youth-serving NGOs. It's a youth-serving NGO that provides young Kenyans with a platform to articulate their issues, explore opportunities for youth participation and leadership to effectively address their interests and concerns and engage young people in social, economic, and political processes. He also has numerous accolades, such as top 40 and the 40 men in Kenya. We have Zach with us, Zachary Omondi. We refer to him as Zach. He's an environment officer at the Siaya County government. He's also a fellow in SAYDS, who has been working with us for a while now. We have Kendi Kaburu, who is also a SAYDS policy instructor, and also does other things in SAYDS, has helped to build our program, which equips youth with knowledge on policy and how they can engage with policy. And we have Perpetua, who is the vice president of SAYDS. So that is the panel that we have and that will be engaging with you. Just to frame this conversation so that we can be able to have a sense of what we are talking about today, something that you can all relate to. In the past few months, governments around the world have been tackling a wide range of interconnected problems that have resulted from the ripple effects of the coronavirus pandemic, which started in just one location in China. Governments are facing complex challenges that are affecting the well-being of their citizens. You've seen people losing jobs. You may have been one of those people who's lost jobs. Learning has slowed down. Schools are still thinking whether they should open or not. You've seen business revenues go down. You've seen farming has been affected, and many, many other challenges. Governments are also facing difficult decisions, especially policy decisions on how to address problems that affect crucial systems that are interconnected. This coronavirus has tested health systems, education systems, and government have had to think about how to deal with policy in those domains. And when a government, whether it's a national or regional government, thinks it has figured out the solution, surprisingly, something happens and the infections again go up. And so the government is again stuck, and now we see these discussions on whether government should shut down or not. Essentially, the complex nature of such phenomena has serious implications on how individuals and organizations think and act to influence how government should govern and make policies. And even now we see different groups lobbying for different education policies, health policies, and so forth. And in the context of coronavirus, you also have civil society organizations that try to make sure that governments are not violating human rights, because these are also connected issues. So it also means that when we think about organizations and individuals that get youth involved in advocating for policies that prioritize youth employment, we also have to think about how we can take into consideration a wide range of issues. So at its basis, at the most basic level, complexity thinking assumes that the world is comprised of very many elements that interact, and most of those elements affect each other. And so because they affect each other, it's impossible to just look at one aspect, because all of them have a role in the systems. So just to get us started, Perpetua, how can we prepare youth effectively to make it possible for them to tackle current and future complex challenges?
Thank you. That's a good question, and I'm sure it's something that a lot of us are trying to grapple with at the moment. You know, there's this idea of youth as future leaders, and so I think the question we're asking ourselves now is, what can we do now to equip them and prepare them to engage both now and in the future? And I think one of it is addressing things from a holistic perspective. If you look at, let's say, the situation in Kenya, most people think that your engagement in, let's say policy making is just a reserve of the few. Let's start there. So people think that it's the government that should be solving all these problems, and our engagement is only during the election cycle. So how do you get young people to know that your engagement goes far beyond the election cycle? You have rights and responsibilities in like a youth-friendly manner too, in a way that's not burdensome. And also getting them to see from a mental perspective, how do you view yourself as a young person? Do you feel as if you have the power as a young person, or the ability to tackle the complex challenges that we are facing? So there's a need to equip them with skills and tools, critical thinking skills. And we're not saying, and you know, we're told that if you think you can change how someone thinks, then you should probably give up, because we've had years of experiences, how we've been cultured, that might be difficult to undo. But then you can give them the tools to begin to think differently for themselves, practical skills. And I'm sure we'll get into this, because a lot of people in the panel have a lot of experience working with young people, giving them the tools and just doing a lot of like mobilizing and capacity building. So just they need to get them to start thinking about the different levels. Levy, you mentioned COVID and how it's really forced us to question our systems. It's really forced us to look at the different levels, that you can't be looking just at the individual level, or you can't just look at things, let's say in policy making, you can't just think about the legal aspect of it. What are the sociocultural barriers that might hinder the implementation of your policy? So that if you're a young lawyer, you know that I'm not just pushing for a certain law to be passed, that I need to think about the communities that are going to be affected by this. I need to think about the different people in the system. So I think at the heart of it is getting people to view things in a more holistic manner and bringing people together. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Perpetua, for that. So I guess in essence, what we're saying is that government, business, and civil society in our contemporary network society are increasingly faced with these complex societal problems. So attempts to deal with these problems, such as, creating enduring policy making or policy implementation and public service delivery, become really hard to manage. And we can think of many examples in this area of complex decision-making processes. But let's go back just to bring in Kate and Rafael, but let me start with you, Kate. So since today we are focusing on governance and policymaking and building on Perpetua's example, what elements of governance does your organization or does Lawyers Hub tackle, and how?
I think at the last question you said what elements of governance does?
Yeah, what elements of governance or policy making does Lawyers Hub deal with?
Oh, does Lawyers Hub tackle?
Yeah.
I think I might have poor internet connectivity at this time. But so Lawyers Hub deals primarily with internet governance and internet policy issues.
So I heard
okay?
internet governance and internet policy issue.
And maybe, so, yeah. So we deal with everything that involves, so as you said, COVID-19 has really pushed us toward technological space. And so one of the issues that are going to be there in the in the coming years, how do we push people? How do we push internet connectivity for people? How do we, I'm not really sure if you can all hear me because my screen froze. So
I had, and I can I can sort of capture some of that. I guess in general, it's just internet governance and internet policy issues. And Rafael, thank you for joining us too. And you also deal with some of these policy issues. And I was just also bringing this question to you. What elements of policy making or governance does your organization tackle, and how you go about that?
Thank you so much, Levy, and thanks to the team for creating this platform and opportunity for us to share our views, perspectives, and experiences. And happy International Youth Day to all of us. It's a special day for young people, and especially people like yourselves who are doing amazing work amplifying the voices of the youth. Now to the question, Levy, that you've asked on the elements of policy that and governance that perhaps we need to look at when dealing with the youth, or rather what we deal with working with the youth when it comes to issues of policy and governance. There are a couple of things. One is the issue of inclusivity in decision making. I think it's very, very important. How do we ensure that no one is left behind, and especially the youth, that we take into consideration youth and youth in their diversity? That for me is extremely very important. The other thing is, protection of young people when they are, engaging in advocacy or agitating for certain levels of accountability. I think it's very, very important. We've just the other day, United Nations passed a resolution, UN Security Council passed a resolution 2535 on protecting the young people who are engaged in civil rights advocacy. It's very, very important because sometimes young people tend to fear. The other thing is the issue of youth representation. or rather representation is extremely important. How do you make sure that young people have a seat at the table? That is very important. And then the other thing is creating opportunity for youth to be able to, vote, that way to be able to put in leaders that truly they can, that value their aspirations or can push for their aspirations. When it comes to policy, I think there are different levels of policy. I think there are specific policies that deal with youth policy, like youth policy. We know that a country like Kenya, we had a youth policy that was developed in 2006, all the way to 2016. It had not been reviewed. And then just the other day, we had a new policy, youth policy approved. So we need specific youth policies that are updated, are also in tune with the current reality. But we also have other policies that enable youth development and youth progress, and generally progress in the society. And so we need to look at that, whether we are talking about policies like, fighting corruption, like anti-corruption, anti-graft policy. It's very, very important, because we know for as long as corruption is gaining root and taking root in a society, then it becomes very difficult to meet development goals. Or whether we are talking about policies like issues of education. COVID, for example, has brought out the concern on, the digital learning. How can we ensure that young people, or rather the society, can be able to access education that is so important for them to be able to enjoy some sort of other rights? We also need to look at policies, and the lawyer was just talking about issues of internet, but there are also general policies of human rights, and accountability are very, very important. So I would say targeted policies that target the youth, but also generally policies that can help young people to be able to participate more effectively as equal members of society, but also help the progress of our society. Thanks, Levy.
All right, thank you so much, Rapael. And when someone hears Rapael talking, there's a possibility that someone would think that you gave birth, or you and other people who formed Youth Congress just came one day and formed Youth Congress. I remember meeting you at the gala and hearing the backstory and realizing it does take a lot of years to actually come to this point. And there's an illusion, right? There's an attempt. There could be an illusion that people get from the surface. Say, I can do this today. I can go register and get in the street and talk like this eloquently and talk about all these policies and things and get started. It's also sort of, for those who have heard the story of Rosa Parks, when people hear Rosa Parks, they think it's that bus incident that changed civil rights, but she had 12 years of training before that point, right? There was years that she had to struggle to get to that point. So with regards to capacity building, just looping back to you, Rafael, and then going back to Kate and the rest. So there's a way in which, when we deal with these issues, certain assumptions can be made about knowledge and skills that we need to effectively address them. And those assumptions sometimes are not spoken clearly and even articulated. So maybe a question for you, Rapael, is what knowledge and skills would you say are required to effectively influence policymaking in order to address, complex issues like human rights, or let's just take human rights or youth security? What knowledge and skills, in your experience, have you seen that are necessary for people to have?
I think there's, first of all, and I've always argued that policy is not, sorry to use this word, but policy is not sexy. And so most of the time you find that it's a space that is deserted. And especially you'll find that young people are never participating effectively and actively in that, in that space. So one is, we need to sort of simplify policy. For young people to be able to engage, or rather demystify, more than simplifying it. Two, I think we need to help young people with analytical skills, which sometimes they lack, to be able to know what are the areas of policy that they need to engage. We also need to help young people with communication skills, which is extremely important, because one of the things you find that young people are not able to engage because they can't communicate, and they can't communicate in policy languages. So how do we help young people with communication skills? But the other important skill that I think we might want to also help young people is, advocacy skills, because it is one thing to know the problem, but it is also another thing to know, where should I go to whom should I go to address my issue, you know? And so you'll find, like now our situation in Kenya, the way we have, you know, a million representatives, you know, from MCAs to MPs to women rep to, so you will find that people are always blaming perhaps the wrong person, you know, for a job that was supposed to be done by someone else. So you will have a problem, but you're channeling it to the wrong person, and so you'll never get the right solution. And so you'll find people really agitated. So things like advocacy skills are also extremely important. But I'm sure my colleagues or the fellow panelists will also add some more. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I like that reference of a million representatives. Go ahead, Kendi.
I like what Rapael is saying about, you know, youth being ready to actually, and I've said this so many times, like every time we have this discussion, I always say that we need to look at it from a pragmatic perspective, in the sense that we are not only being so vigilant about having a seat at the table, but equipping people to actually bring something to the table. And this is what I feel, this is what we've been trying to do as SAYDS. And so far, from what we have done, I can tell that, you know, there's an actual transformation in the minds of these young people. And the most important thing is that they've been able to realize that actually they have a role to play in the process. Because what Rapael said about policy not being so attractive to young people is because they think it's a politician's game. And having them, and as I was preparing for this session that we're going to have next Sunday, and about the stakeholders in the policy making processes, and having myself, I knew that young people have a thing, they have a role to play, because, you know, the Constitution said. And then I actually looked at it, and I'm thinking, young people as individual citizens and in the interest groups they organize themselves into have a real effective and efficient role to play in it. And for us to be able to equip young people with that knowledge that, yo guys, this is not a thing that is very drawn away from you. It is a thing that you actually play a role in, and you should. And then telling them, well, how do you go? Now that the Constitution and all these youth policies have made it possible for you to have a seat at the table, how do you prepare yourself to bring something to the table? So that we're not then having discussions that we have a lot of representatives whose effect we're not really feeling, so that we are also able to think about quantity of representation over quality of representation.
Thank you, Kendi.
Kendi, you know, you've said the session that we have on Sunday, and people don't know what session this is. So tell us a little bit more about what you and your team have been doing.
I thought I was the only one who didn't get the memo.
Yeah, I saw Rafael's face. I was like, am I invited to this session?
I'm sorry about that. So we've been setting up a policy and advocacy team, a program at SAYDS, which is ideally, the first group that we've started with is the group of fellows that have gone through CAT and SIT, which are two parts of the program that SAYDS has put together, in the sense that they're equipped with skills and knowledge that enables them to approach problems as complex problems and have a systems thinking perspective to trying to find solutions to these problems. So now the program sort of just like the icing on the cake. You already learn how to think about a problem as complex. You've learned how to think about the solution to this problem as, you know, a systemic problem, as a systems thinker. So now the knowledge they acquire through this program that we're doing is supposed to enable them transform the solutions and, you know, the ideas that they had as solutions to these problems they identified into some sort of policy, and to be able to give policy options and policy ideas to, you know, the people involved in decision making. So basically that is what we've been doing for the last 3 Sundays, and this Sunday we have the last session. So we've been able to think about very many aspects of policy making, as many as we could fit into the amount of time we had, really. And so that is what I'm referring to. On Sunday, we are going to talk about stakeholders. We are going to try to map stakeholders in the policy making process in Kenya.
Thank you. And we can come back to that at a later point in a different question. Maybe, Zach, since you have been a SAYDS fellow and you are able to use some of these, speaking for yourself in terms of being able to use this knowledge and skills in this environmental policy in Siaya, what would you say in terms of the knowledge and skills that would be needed to address such a complex issue like climate change, which is perhaps what the policy you're looking at is about? If you just look focusing on just knowledge and skills, Rapael has talked about analytical skills, advocacy skills, communication skills, among others. Kendi is talking about systemic skills and all that. What else can you add to that, Zach?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I think they've said it all. I'll just try to sort of compound it in my own language, but they've said it all. So the first one, which is very, very crucial, is youth being able to understand the kind of problem that they're trying to solve. So is it complex problem? Is it merely complicated? Or is this just a complicated problem? So you find most people do not have that range of thinking in terms of youth. So they think, well, it's about climate change, then let's plant more trees, and they leave it at that. But having the knowledge to understand that the solution that you're trying to provide, whether you're giving suggestions to policy or you're giving suggestion to any plan, that is development plan, then you need to understand the problem. So I think for youth to be able to get prepared to tackle such global challenges, then you should be able to understand what kind of problem you're trying to solve. And then the second one that they talked about, which is analytical skills. So I was trying to bring it to the perspective of mentorship. So you find youths are actually, I met youths personally over my period who are very interested in climate change, for example. And these youths have embraced technology, which is good, so that they can get information online or wherever they're getting it and make sure that it is reputable. So then the other thing that comes about analytical skills is mentorship. So they have to get someone to actually help them to communicate, like Rapael said, and analyze whatever thing they're trying to say. So then expert like in that area that they're trying to solve. So I met some of them and they even took my contact, so we could constantly talk about it and sort of think around about it. And yeah, I think it's very important for youth to understand in the context of mentorship that it's not possible to sort of tackle these problems or future global problems in a individual level. So they need to have to join interest groups, or like when you say in SAYDS, the nodes, a node that has reachability, so it can reach several actors within that same network, so they can be able to contribute in terms of the policy direction as a youth, even at individual level. So I think that's what I can say from that level.
So in terms of, so that we've done two things here. And thanks to all of you. So, and we'll come back to Kate for you in a moment. I think in terms of, we've done two things in the sense that we've talked about the complexity of problems like coronavirus and other kinds of problems like security issues, in the sense that the assumption here is that you have these elements that interact, or systems that interact, and make it very challenging to deal with such complex problems. And so we're talking about skills that would be necessary for a young person or youth to acquire in order to deal with these kinds of challenges. If I just go back all the way to what Rafa talked about, analytical advocacy, communication, Kendi talked about something to do with the system skills, and then also Zach is talking about tech skills and everything like that. So there is a sense in which we could use an interdisciplinary perspective to say that if we are equipping youth with skills, or equipping them to be able to deal with these things, that we could use this perspective. Let's take AIDS, for example, or AIDS policy from this perspective, at least looking at how AIDS policies came about. you look at it and you say, okay, there were epidemiologists at the table, there were government policy people at the table, there were social cultural factors to be considered. And so with regards to AIDS, if you take those perspectives, someone with an epidemiological background has a very specialized set of skills. They're able to think about how do you control the infection, what are the patterns of spread in this disease, how do you monitor patients, and how do you track these cases. Someone with policy background from government can talk about issues to do with how do you create a center for disease control, and how do you deal with the governments, which are basically at different levels. And if you're an anthropologist who deals with social cultural factors, you can talk about cultural practices and religious norms and so forth. So there's a broad way in which we could make the case, or an assumption, that someone who can deal with these issues that deal with this capacity building has to be able to see a holistic sort of picture or see things broadly. So Perpetua, maybe to you, if you take this interdisciplinary perspective or transdisciplinary, how do you think youth can be equipped with these kinds of thinking skills and practical skills and knowledge that are necessary to tackle these complex problems?
I feel like a lot of our responses will be, it's not easy. Like it's a lot of heavy lifting. And as you said, like we need so many people with different sorts of expertise to be able to shape what it is that we're sort of like equipping youth with. So Rapael mentioned something really interesting. He said we need to simplify and demystify policy making. So why not have lawyers who understand and can help us maintain the integrity of what it is we're trying to communicate? Ask how many young people know what's in the Constitution. I myself, it took me, like I learned when I was doing my thesis, just because I had to. Like it wasn't something that I just picked up and I was like, oh, it's a Sunday afternoon, let me just go read the Constitution, see what it says. You know, because most people, you take what it is you hear. So that's sort of like secondary information, what's in the news, what your parents are saying. So how do we ensure we build a team that has lawyers who can tell us what's in the Constitution, has policy analysts, has artists who can tell the story, who can, you know, make graphics, make music, make poetry. How do we have psychologists who tell us how to, so we have like a lot of psychologists who handle adolescents, teenagers, young adults. How can they tell us how young people think? What about youth identity makes them marginalize themselves? How can they tell us how to handle young people? Also involving young people themselves, so you can sit and hear from them. I keep saying from them as if I'm not one of them. I am. Young people, so that we can say the reason I don't participate is because of this and this, so that people are not assuming why I'm not participating, and they're not assuming. So just getting rid of those assumptions. So in short, like building a very holistic team that helps us ensure that young people are adequately sort of, equipped to be able to effectively participate in policymaking.
Thanks. So if we take, so let's all think about this. If we take, for example, an issue like climate change, which is an issue that we talk about a lot nowadays. Of course, coronavirus has sort of pushed it to the back burner, but it's still an important issue. We also have coronavirus. You have basically health policies that need to be created. You have education policies, which is also a complex issue. So these are all complex issues. So Rapael and even Kate, when you're looking at these issues from a policy standpoint, and you're trying to think about the kind of policies to advocate for something like a health policy, or something like a tech policy, or something like an agricultural policy, there's this sense that an interdisciplinary perspective should push you or push us to think about the kinds of knowledge that are needed, or someone needs, or a group of people need, in order to go and address this thing effectively, or even propose the appropriate policy. So let's come to Tech Hub, for example, and let's say, Kate, you're thinking about tech for education, right? Tech policy for education. In that sense, you have to think about the businesses that provide technology, you have to think about infrastructure, you have to think about supplies, you have to think about books, you have to think about consumers, you have to think about all sorts of things. So what should youth competency for influencing policymaking and or governance in that kind of issue look like from your standpoint as a lawyer? So of course, even making that case is forcing you to look at it from one standpoint, so it shouldn't be the case. But from a lawyer's hub standpoint, how do you think capacity building should be approached when you're dealing with such a complex issue that needs different kinds of knowledge?
So I'm going to be honest and say that I work in tech policy, but I've never really thought about how to teach other people, because most of the people who will work with me often are going to be lawyers or public policy professionals or people who understand what it is I'm talking about. So one gap that, first of all, I think we need to identify is that the people who are actually involved in public policy processes, like myself, for example, sometimes we wonder, and I'll give an example. So many young people right now are bloggers and they take up digital jobs and all these things. So last year, at a time when Parliament wanted to introduce a bill that was going to regulate the online space and was going to require bloggers to register and do all these things, I expected that when I went to Parliament to talk about why we don't need such a law, I'd find so many young activists, so many bloggers saying, listen, we don't want this. But to my surprise, when I actually got there, it was the same people, the same organizations, the same human rights activists who go and defend all these laws all the time. And we look as if we're speaking from our own perspective. And so I think one of the things that we need to do and we need to realize, even as human rights organizations and public policy professionals, is that we need to then involve other people in our activities, to then involve the youth who we're now talking about. And we need to realize how, because even if you look at the people that civic space and civic organizations actually include in the activities are people who are already doing what it is they're amplifying. So they don't actually go and look for new people and start training them or start doing anything that has capacity building in that sense. They actually just take people who are already involved and try and amplify their processes. So one of the things I would say is, so from a grassroots level, it really requires me to think, because I've never really had to deal with a situation where we're beginning from the grassroots, from people who don't actually know. But I do know that we conduct civic training, which is, I think, one of the ways in which we are able to transfer knowledge. Because a lot of these digital issues, there are things you interact with every day, but you can't really see it from that point until you sort of bring your knowledge towards it. So for example, if it's like education and tech, we would have spent a year or 2 years trying to convince people or trying to come up with policies to deal with education and tech. But now, because of COVID-19, we don't have to do that anymore. And so we have to look at issues for marginalized communities and how do we bring people who are in marginalized areas into this space, because right now people can't do exams because they don't have actually that facility. And so when we go to Parliament and we say, for example, we want you to utilize these funds better so that we can have, this type of internet connectivity, I would say that public policy professionals don't actually capacity build, they just engage stakeholders without actually looking. But one of the things we need to do in order to improve youth participation, 1 would be training, 2 would be capacity building, and 3 would be just developing easy readable material. Like you don't need to, like for example, one of the things why social media is so engaging is because you only get 160 characters. Like you only say what you want in 160 characters. So kama imeisha ni hivyo. Like you can't say anything more. So I feel like that sort of engagement needs to be that simple that people can be able to understand. So,
thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate. You've highlighted a sort of gap that we have, that in all these spaces, how the system is designed is there's only engagement of people who already know. And that's why we see that, let's say, policy making in our heads, we think it's for the lawyers, it's for the policy analysts, the people that's their day-to-day job. And so, Levy, I think I'm just curious because, 1, you've worked a lot with young people, you've taught complexity and systems thinking even at a university level, and also with the work that we do in SAYDS, I would just be curious, like what approaches can be used to teach youth how to facilitate social change at different levels and how to sort of meaningfully engage in that governance aspect, just to address that gap that Kate has highlighted very well for us.
Thank you. I think from my experience, and I think complexity thinking, the way we teach it, we teach it from a generalist perspective, assuming you're not going to be just a very mono-focused specialist, in the sense that you can actually take other tracks to learn how to be a coder, you can learn how to be a biologist or chemist, but then we try to sort of expose you to other ways of thinking and other ways of looking at problems. So you find, I think, at least for me from a teaching standpoint, the challenge is usually when you come across something called blind intelligence, right? There's a philosopher who called it blind intelligence, where you have someone who is very good at biology or very good at economics or very good at something like chemistry, but then they cannot tackle a general problem. And I think studies were done, there's a study that was done on London School of Economics that actually showed that people struggle when you give them a general problem, and especially young people, that someone who is a chemist can be given a social problem and they only see it from their chemistry or biology or physics or political science or agricultural perspective, but they can't see general spectrum of the problem. And so in that case, then the way I would say we approach it is we design the curriculum in such a way that we bring all these different disciplines and we use them to influence how we design the course, so that the course exposes you to a philosophy, to psychology, to biology, to some chemistry. So you get a whole spectrum, so that when you look at a problem, you can see all these elements and you can interrogate those elements. It's essentially this idea of transdisciplinarity also makes this case that you need to bring stakeholders with different ways of knowing and different ways of learning. I like what Kate said about making sure you take into consideration people who have indigenous knowledge, who can actually bring other ways of learning that we don't think about. So in terms of designing pragmatically, as Kendi was saying, I think it's an issue of accepting, number one, as it's always been said, complexity does not think in boundaries, it's humans who think in boundaries. Complexity just thinks in complexity and brings everything to you at the table. And you, if you think in boundaries, you'll be limited in how you tackle the problem. So capacity building, to me, should include, we in our institution, we teach in groups. We teach when we design the course, we have me, who's a political scientist, we have a philosopher, we have all these other people who come and design these particular aspects that can actually take, influence the students to see all these things in different ways. So I don't know whether that answers, but at least making sure you are coming out not as a specialist, but as a generalist, in the sense that you can see range. You have a range of knowledge. And even studies have shown people who have won Nobel are not just good at one thing, they're very good at many things. They can see very many dimensions of a problem, and that's why they get to that level of thinking. So capacity building essentially should really think in terms of, if you don't have that, you should be able to see how you can expand beyond what you actually just look at. So Zach, I know you dealt with this, coming back to you, you dealt with this environmental policy issue. I want to ask this question for you as a young person. Of course, Perpetua acknowledged that. It's easy to forget that. As a young person working in Siaya County government and dealing with this environmental policy, did you to some extent feel that you lacked certain knowledge? In the sense that you knew certain things, but you knew you were not well equipped for certain things. What's your sense in that area when you're working on this policy? You're muted, sorry. You're muted.
I keep forgetting, sorry. So one thing that I'm actually grateful that I can actually say is, by the time that we started working on that policy, and we were also working, as I was also part of SAYDS fellow, so that there's some things that I found myself doing and that I couldn't unlearn. So one of them is actually being able to appreciate that climate change is a complex social problem. So then the aspect of nonlinearity is there, and okay, like 1 + 1 is not 2. So then I appreciated that perspective, and it's I wouldn't say that I didn't have it, but then when I was working on that policy, I had it at that particular moment. So I could only imagine how could have contributed without that. So, and also in that aspect, I would also say that we were creating a policy and with a systems thinking approach, I was brought to understand that the solutions that we're trying to create can themselves create other problems that we didn't intend to do by creating the policy. So then having to think in a meticulous manner, in a careful manner, is one of the aspects that I would say I learned all through, and having stakeholders, yes, like you mentioned, stakeholders that are going to be affected by the problem, and the ones that are going to support the problem. So just having them and having what they think, so that you can have sort of a negotiation. And I found out that everywhere in life you have to negotiate, everywhere in life, everywhere. So then the aspect of negotiation and having all these stakeholders, the ones that do not want it, the ones that want it, and then sort of like having a middle ground. So I would say generally that's what it is for me.
I like something that, and I think Kendi, I saw you nod to this, so I'm going to bring you in here. Zach pointed out that I think this is also to the audience, that the idea that problems are complex and that you have to be serious about interdisciplinarity have implications on people's lives. Like, if you don't think about other dimensions, you may be perfect in creating a solution, but it could actually lead to affecting other people. It could work for you because you only see that little picture, but the ripple effects could affect other people. And I think this is the story of coronavirus, right? In the sense that if you look at the early months of coronavirus, there was a little bit of opacity. There was no transparency on what was happening. And all of a sudden, we are all dealing with unemployment, lack of income, lack of well-being, governments are in debt, because there was no sense of the big picture. So there's this idea that knowledge should give you a bigger picture and you should be thoughtful about the bigger picture. Kendi, I'm wondering what sort of thing came to mind when you had this point from Zach?
I mean, I immediately thought about the right solution for the right problem, and how this idea just sat in my mind completely. And it's usually very real for me, thinking about, you may have a brilliant solution, like this in a different context would work perfectly, but in this particular context, because of these particular factors, then this solution cannot work. So complexity, having the knowledge about complexity and systems thinking really enables you to be able to look at the problem from so many different perspectives and be able to think about, the mental models for the people you intend to involve. If I want to talk about reproductive healthcare, and I know that maybe the religious groups will be actively involved in this, I would want to think about what are the things that these people believe in so strongly that are going to affect their framing of this particular problem or this particular issue. Will they just think it's about abortion, so we block it? What will women feel about this particular policy or law that we're trying to put together? They'll feel that this works for us, so yes, yay, we are here. So being able to think about all of these perspectives really enables you to come up with a solution that works for that particular problem effectively. So because if you have a brilliant solution and it doesn't work for that problem, then there's nothing we're doing. And if we have a problem, and we do not have a solution for, also does not work. So having this wide view of things really enables you to be able to get the perfect solution for the perfect problem. So being able to solve effectively.
Thank you so much, Kendi, for that. And I think in sort of, if you're in the public and you're watching these and you have any questions to anyone or to the panel, feel free to send them and then we will talk about them, or any comments that you have. But I want to go back to something that Kate pointed out, and coming back to you, Kate. I think one of the things that you pointed out, Kate, and all of us are pointing out is our limitations as human beings, right? I cannot know everything, and I will never know everything. That's impossible. Even if complexity provides me with 100 forms of knowing I need to do, I can't design for you a capacity building program in SAYDS that covers everything. But that doesn't mean I shouldn't try, right? In the sense that I should still think about ponder, especially based on what Kendi says, I should ponder about this particular issue, that even if I was to be consciously aware of what I should equip youth with, that I should accept my limitations, but I should still think in terms of how I can come up with a program that sort of pushes capacity building towards accepting complexity and interdisciplinarity. So Kate, do you have, just from what we've talked about and in your own experience, what approaches do you think could be used to teach youth on how to sort of facilitate or push for change? Let's say you get a lawyer, right? You get a law student, and I teach, so I know if I get a student from one field, that's what they focused on mostly for 4 years. So let's say you get a law student and they mostly focused on law and they want to influence policy out there in general. What are some approaches you think can sort of be used to teach youth on how to facilitate complex social change, so that this lawyer's mind can be open, so they don't only look at law, but they think about it broadly? What ways can such a person be taught?
So I'm a tech policy advocate, so I'm going to be biased, and I'm going to be biased, and I'm going to say that first of all, I think that social media is a good tool of engagement, and this is why. So, for example, the IG of police recently launched a Twitter hashtag where he chats with people online. And you know, I don't think people identify public policy processes when they're staring them on the face. Like, you log into Twitter and then you can be able to engage the IG every Monday from 11 to 1. And so you can be able to ask him any question. That means you can be able to raise your activism at that particular point in time. And I think that's something we need to amplify. So I think that promoting civic spaces, promoting online civic spaces is one way of training the youth to engage in public policy processes. So that's my take, one thing. Because if you, online petitions, online hashtags, online protests have a way of influencing what happens offline. So for example, if you're dealing with anything, okay, so there's this thing about tourism. So recently, someone was going to be appointed to the tourism board, but she had earlier posted something that was wrong, or that's something that didn't actually promote tourism. And so activism on Twitter revoked her appointment. Like, that sort of activism revoked her appointment, and that's policy. So that's actually promoting transparent government, and that's promoting accountability. So that's one of the ways. Another way in which we can build capacity for the youth to engage in policy is to actually demystify some of the processes that we have and policy processes, because sometimes they look like we can't actually go to parliament, we can't do all these things, but it's as simple as just writing an email sometimes and forwarding. And I think that that's something we should encourage as civic space. We should just, like, it's one of the things that we can encourage. Like, you can see a bill, you can see how it affects you, and you can just write and you can send it. So that's another thing. Another thing, and I think that's it for now. I have to think through the rest. But yeah, so digital activism, social activism. I'm sorry, I'm really biased.
No, I think I like that admission, and I hope many people in the audience, even myself, when I think about, you know, comparative politics or political economy, I will be biased in my response, to be honest, because that's all I tend to think about most of the time. But I think part of it is accepting the bias. Like, for me, I would accept and then think about what else do I need to think about. But all of us would do that, and it's just natural to do something like that. Perpetua.
Yeah, I feel like you've already highlighted the importance of transdisciplinarity, that we have blind spots and we have things that we know well. And so it's important to get like different perspectives, because there's something a political scientist might miss, as opposed to someone who's doing tech policy. And so, Levy, just thinking about this, what are some of the outcomes of a capacity building program that takes complexity and interdisciplinarity seriously? And we keep talking about a systems thinker. Who is that? What skills do they have? How can they get those skills? So that, you know, because people might have that question, oh, this sounds interesting, how do I become one?
Yeah, I would say, okay, going back to how you asked the question, if you take complexity seriously. If you think, and I think coronavirus sort of makes us take it seriously, among other things. And if you take it seriously, that you also have to appreciate interdisciplinarity or being a generalist in some sense, then outcome-wise, I'm thinking about the program. Think about the program. It's a blank box. It's for you in the public or everybody to think about, here is the program. It's for you to think, what should the program, but here should be the outcome of the program. I think, and this to echo what Kate, I'm biased in this sense as a systems person. I think that someone who comes out of such a program should be able to make connections between systems, should be able to understand the connection between a health system, agricultural system, economic system, should be able to look at how elements change over time, because in complexity, things adapt and change. One policy action or a government program will lead people to adapt in a certain way, that youth should see the bigger picture, should be able to look at things from a bigger picture over time. And what Kendi said, should be able to think about multiple perspectives of the problem, not just the perspective that they have on the problem, and that they should think about these relationships that are not, as Zach said, are not linear, they're circular, that these things affect each other in circular ways, and that they should think about the structure broadly that they don't see and how it affects these particular issues. And also think about short-term and long-term consequences of actions that they take or affect, but also question their own assumptions. So those are some of the things that I think a program like that should actually have. There's a question, I don't want to miss a chance to answer Imali's question on chat. Kendi, would you like to take that question? The first one, just the first question, just briefly, maybe in a minute. How panelists, how we navigate trade-offs in policy decisions.
I'd say it's a bit of a complex question that is difficult to answer in a short while, but I'd think about it in the sense that if you have a complex understanding of an issue, if you're thinking about that particular issue as being a systemic problem and it being a complex problem, then it gives you time to be able to find a final, like the thing that you come up with eventually enables you to be able to make sure that all the people who will be affected by that particular solution that you're providing, or that particular policy that you're setting, are not put at a disadvantaged position, so that when you do not think about it from the various perspectives, then you're blind to the trade-offs because you're only advocating for your what you believe in, what you want to happen. But complexity, being able to look at the problem in that it is a complex problem, and one particular solution that I think about, looking at it from my, say, 20-something young woman who, if I look at it with only my perspective, then I come up with a solution that probably favors me, but puts another group of people at a disadvantage. But if I'm able to think about it as a solution that is going to affect different groups of people who have different beliefs, then I'm able to factor all of them in and, at least reduce the amount of trade-offs that are going to be there, or just do away with them altogether.
Thank you for that response. To the second question, which I also think it's important, and a lot of people ask from a public administration standpoint, which is something that I also teach, is that when a government comes up with a budget, it is trying to improve service, right? But like we have said, improving service in one area could actually undermine service in another area. It's just the way complexity works, right? And so what I would say to that issue of how you equip to appreciate complexity is to just, first of all, map the complexity. And in complex systems, we say identify leverage points, and identify root causes and leverage points. Because if you have a minimal budget, but you also have a complex system that has different points that are affecting outcomes, maybe affecting health, or maybe affecting water services, there is usually a leverage point in complex systems that where minimal resources can be allocated, because you're appreciating this complexity and you can't address all the aspects, but there are some that are primary targets that you can address and improve service in those sense, in a minimal sense. So basically you're talking about strategy, you're talking about mapping, you're talking about identifying connections, you're talking about root causes, in the sense that you're doing that to improve service in the best way that you can with the minimal resources that you can. Of course, even from a complexity standpoint, you're also thinking about things like adaptiveness, resilience, and things like that. Because once you act as a government, you also have to be vigilant in terms of realizing that you want to make sure you can adapt if something goes wrong or goes a different way. So there are certain sort of skills from a complexity standpoint that someone can gain to approach budgeting and budget and administration and designing programs that make sure you're accepting that you can solve everything, but you can't also harm everything. But even those that you can harm, that there's a way you can actually be ready to take care of when you harm those things when they occur. So there's this idea of scenario planning also. You plan scenarios and you think about, if we spend this way, this could be the case. This is a scenario. We have this budget to take care of these adaptations and things like that. Unfortunately, I'm so sorry for those who sent questions. I just don't want to keep anyone beyond time that they had planned to be here. Maybe some people plan to head off to bed or lunch, wherever you are in the world, or go back to work. And so it's fair to just say, to bring it to an end at this point. But we will continue having these sessions. And even if you had a question, we have Facebook posts and other places, and the video will be posted. You can add this question there and we'll respond to them. But we'll also be continuing with this in the same stream, so you can come back to the same things. In closing, I just want to encourage everyone, whether you are a civic activist or whether you train youth or whether you're a youth, to try and think about problems that we deal from this bigger picture and realize that there are connections among these problems. And also just ask yourself, as much as we ask ourselves all the time, what does it mean in terms of knowledge that we need to acquire to be able to not create harm, but also lead to lasting solutions that benefit everyone? Because sometimes you may actually have the most amazing solution, and that's the case. But if you don't see the bigger picture, you've hurt so many people with your most amazing solutions. And sometimes these problems we see in complexity are because someone has the best intentions, not the worst intentions. It's just that they did not think about connectedness of issues. And then these things become problematic over time. So we'll end it here. We'll let you know when the next session is. There's an email in chat that has been shared if you have any more questions, and we'll make sure we answer those questions. And we look forward to engaging with you in future. Wherever you are, have a wonderful night or have a good afternoon. Or if it's morning, have a good morning, and we'll see you in the next sessions.